Iowa State is one of those teams that everybody is waiting to watch actually play because we don't know what's going to happen. But that first game, well, it might be an absolute blowout.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, my name is Nick Marovets, and today we are talking about Iowa State football, and specifically Iowa State football against their opponents. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but the first thing we're going to talk about is Iowa State versus Southeast Missouri State, because the spread is now out. We're going to break down that spread, how that really could play out for Iowa State, how that compares to other spreads, what this means for the team. Then we're going to break down offense and defense in the last two segments of today's show to really lay out what we could be looking at as far as win margins or potentially loss margins for Iowa State this upcoming season. But we got to start with the new spread that has been released. Iowa State hosting Southeast Missouri State on September 5th at noon Central. Okay? That's what's going down. That's when it's going down. That's where it's going down. How much is Iowa State predicted to win by? I couldn't believe it when I saw this number. This is via our friends over at FanDuel. Iowa State is predicted to win that game by 30.5 points. That's a lot of points. 4 touchdowns and nearly a field goal, right? That's kind of the hook there. So right when I saw that, my first thought is, because I'm kind of viewing this Iowa State team the way that I've viewed Iowa teams in the past, with the defense versus the offense. My first thought was, can Iowa State score 31 points? Can they go 31-0, right? I think we can get into that in a second, more, in the second segment. But the short answer to that is, if Iowa State can score, 15 or 18 unanswered, I think they can get to 31 unanswered. That's a very tall task to do it unanswered, but nonetheless, I think it's possible. But then my second thought was, wow, 30.5 points in one direction for Southeast Missouri State, 12.5 points the other direction for Iowa. Now, I don't know what that line opened up at. I can't remember. I feel like it was closer to 14 or 15, but nonetheless, now I'm looking at it right now, and Iowa State is a 12.5 point dog to Iowa. And I'm not here to predict either way. I'm just using these numbers as information, because these numbers are essentially how Iowa State is viewed, right? If Iowa State were to play this team, we think they would be, a victor, or what would that be? A loss. They would take a loss by this many points. Okay. And that's how you can gauge how good Iowa State is in the eyes of the people who make up these numbers. So, long story short, Iowa State's better than Southeast Missouri State, but not as good as Iowa. I don't think that's a shock. Okay. I think when you look at Iowa State's schedule, you've probably done this. I've definitely done this a handful of times. They're kind of given 2 wins in the Southeast Missouri State and the Bowling Green games. I don't think that's anything new. It's not anything shocking. That's pretty standard operating procedure for a squad like Iowa State in a Power 4 conference. But it did get me thinking, and I just wanted to pull this up. This isn't like necessarily the best parallel, to be honest. This is kind of unrelated. The Southeast Missouri State spread will more revisit the rest of today's show, but I wanted to talk about it in comparison to this Iowa spread. And you're going to have to follow my train of thought here. So Iowa State is a 12.5 point dog to Iowa, meaning they're probably going to, or at least FanDuel thinks they're going to lose the Cyhawk game by somewhere around 12 points, 12, 13, 14, 10, 11, somewhere in that range. That's kind of how I look at this number. And why is that the case? Well, for one, new coach. Okay. 2, we don't really know what to expect. Like, that line will move if Iowa State beats Southeast Missouri State by 150 points. That line will move if Iowa State loses to Southeast Missouri State, or if it's a close game. Like, as we gather information on this Iowa State squad, that line is going to move in the Iowa State-Iowa game. So right now, we're kind of going into this Cyhawk game blind. We don't know what this new roster is going to be able to do. We don't know what this new staff is going to look like when it comes to the actual field of play, right? The coaches are the ones putting the players in positions. That's kind of what we're looking at here. All right. And the reason I bring up the roster, the staff is interesting, yes, but the reason I bring up the roster is because there is some doubt in this roster because so much comes from the transfer portal from all over the country. Did they come from high tier Power Four schools? Did they come from Big 12, ACC, SEC, Big 10? For Iowa State, the kind of crazy answer is not really. It was players who stayed at Iowa State. Washington State had a good chunk of these players, and then kind of all over. Yes, players that did play previously, like Caden Crawford, played at Iowa, but then ended up the technical transfer was from South Dakota. Okay. Players from Iowa Western, right? Players from all over, all levels of football. That's what got me thinking about this Iowa State game in a different way. And then my algorithm actually pushed me in the right direction. It reminded me of one of the earliest memories I have of football. It was before we had a flat screen. It was a big old tube TV in a TV, housing compartment. What do they even call those? An entertainment center? Nobody really uses entertainment centers anymore. Kind of tells you where we're at in time here. Big entertainment center, big deep TV. 2016 Iowa versus NDSU. NDSU goes on to win that game, right? I remember watching the field goal go through and immediately going outside and playing catch for 20 minutes because I was so excited to watch Iowa lose to North Dakota State. Now, at the time, I didn't really know how good NDSU was, okay? I didn't know really much about anything. I was just happy to see Iowa lose. But I was curious. I was like, you should go back to that coaching staff. I'm curious. And my curiosity ended up having a little bit of a substance to it. Guess who was on that NDSU squad? None other than Tyler Roll as the tight ends fullbacks coach in 2016. I mean, I just think that is so interesting. So we're going to talk more about the 30.5 point spread here over the course of the rest of the show. Okay, so stick around, hit subscribe, do all that. But for now, I'm thinking about that Cyhawk game. I'm thinking about 30.5 versus 12.5. How do those games differ? Where does Iowa State actually land in those two? And I personally, I feel like they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. They feel so weird to me. 30.5 is closer to right, in my opinion. I think Iowa State could be closer to what that NDSU team was able to beat big teams, essentially. I think people are looking at this Iowa State roster and assuming they're not going to be able to beat the big ones. They're a 12.5 point dog. Yeah, I mean, they're a Power 4 school. They're going to beat, the Southeast Missouri States, the Bowling Greens of the world. I think that's how people are viewing this. But when they see them up against an Iowa, right? Or as we get into the Big 12 play, against BYU, I could be wrong about this, but I think everyone else is saying, well, they can't compete with those kinds of teams. They're going to be, in a few games with the bottom of the Big 12, and they might win a game here and there, but they're not going to be consistently in it with the top of the top. I disagree. I'm not saying that Iowa State is the NDSU of that 2016 match between Iowa and NDSU. I'm not saying that. I know that that's kind of like a weird, how did he even get there kind of thing. Oh, rent free. I get it. Like I do. I understand that. It's more the algorithm reminded me, and I checked. Tyler will just so happen to be on that coaching staff. I think that we need to give this team a little bit more credit. I think they have the talent, and they just haven't been put on the stage, so to speak. I think that, Tyler Roll has had experience with that kind of a situation at NDSU. Perfect example, that game in particular. But when you look at what Jimmy Rogers has done, this entire staff, I believe this roster will be very competitive. And I think that they're going to be closer to the 30.5 point favorite the rest of the season, as opposed to the 12.5 point dog that we're seeing right now in the Cyhawk game. But for Iowa State to win games, they have to score points and they have to stop their opponent. First thing we have to talk about is, if Iowa State's a 30.5 point favorite, can they even score 31 points to cover that spread, even if they gave up no points? We'll talk about that coming up right here after this. But first, a word from our friends over at The Game. Since 1986, The Game has been creating classic college hats that fans are proud to wear. Whether you're an alumni, current student, season ticket holder, or simply someone who never misses a game, a great college hat is more than just apparel. It's a way to represent your school wherever you go. This year, the game is celebrating its 40th anniversary by giving fans a chance to save on some of their most iconic college hats. If you've been thinking about replacing an old favorite or adding a new one to your collection, now is the perfect time. For me, you see all of this memorabilia behind me. I've got a ton more in my closet. I wear stuff to these games. And to me, after that experience, these articles of clothing or hats or whatever it is, they have a memory associated with them. I remember when I see that, oh, I went to that game and that's what happened. Oh, that one was super rainy, but I remember this specific play, or I remember doing this or that. It adds an extra bit of lore essentially to each piece of gear that I have. And I'm very thankful for each and every single piece I've worn to a game and how they all have their own memory. With hundreds of officially licensed college hats to choose from, you'll find the perfect fit for game day and every day. Don't miss this chance to celebrate 40 years of the game with 40% off your entire order. Visit thegamecaps.com and use promo code locked on at checkout. That's thegamecaps.com, promo code locked on. Celebrate 40 years of the game with 40% off. But don't wait. This anniversary offer won't last forever. So Iowa State is a 30.5-point favorite to Southeast Missouri State. New line that I saw. Little shocked by that for sure. But it got me thinking about their spread against Iowa because that's obviously one of the bigger matchups. Well, it's the biggest matchup before conference play. It's one of their bigger matchups early on in the season before their bye. We'll say it like that. We talked a little bit about where I think Iowa State sits in comparison between those two lines. Are they closer to a 12.5-point dog in more of their games, or are they closer to a 30.5-point favorite in more of their games? I personally think they're closer to a favorite, but 30.5 points is a lot of points. I mean, it just is. That is a ridiculous number of points to win a game by, not even just score that many points. So if Iowa State were to win a game 31-0, that's what it would take at the minimum to cover that spread, right? If they gave up 30 points to Southeast Missouri State to cover the spread, they would have to score 61 points. What a game that would be. What a game that would be. Can Iowa State's offense keep up with a spread like that? And not necessarily just in this game, but can they put up spreads kind of that same caliber the rest of the season because their offense is, good, to put it quite simply. Well, I want to break down that in just a second, but first I want to thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day and remind you can get your daily Cyclones fix completely ad-free by joining the Everydayer Club today. Start your 7-day free trial right now and get closer to your team without the interruptions. Click the link in the show notes or go to lockedoncyclones.supercast.com to claim your free trial. So Iowa State's offense has been between the two units, the unit that I am less, I don't want to say excited. I'm very, very excited to see what happens. But almost, I'm just not as certain about. When it comes to the defense, I really feel like this Iowa State squad is going to be very, very good. My only question mark is around the secondary. And constantly, this happened last year too, constantly what I'm hearing is, oh, this secondary is ridiculously deep. This secondary has an enormous amount of talent. Look, I'm kind of at the point where I'm going to have to actually see that play out. But from a linebacker perspective, from a defensive line perspective, the way I'm seeing it and the way that, Jesse Bobbitt and Jimmy Rogers and all these other coaches are seeing it, they're going to be very good. Can they score the points? Part of the reason I immediately thought of the Iowa State game was 30.5 points. I could see Iowa State being one of those teams that just gives up about, we can go with 14 points a game. On average on the year, they give up 14 points a game. There's going to be a few games that are high, like 35 points. There's going to be a few games where they hold very, very strong and only allow 3, 4, 7, 2 safeties. What happened there? They only gave up 4 points. And that's not even really the defense, right? I could see them being that type of a squad and much closer to essentially what Iowa State basketball was a few years ago. It wasn't quite this way this last year, but a team that can hold you to 45, 50, 55, maybe low 60s. That'd be a pretty high scoring game for an Iowa State opponent, but can they score 60 points? That's kind of the question of Iowa State basketball over the last few years, not every single year. I understand that. I would say that wasn't the case this year. But that's been the story for Iowa football for forever. You guys remember the point tracker? Like, every point matters for Iowa football. And this isn't even necessarily a dig at them. It's just the style of play that Iowa football has had forever. They're going to be one of the best teams defensively in the country year in and year out. What can they do offensively? That's the question. That's why the Iowa State game came to mind, because I view Iowa State in kind of the same way this year. I expect at this point, this is kind of the corner I've backed myself into, that Iowa State is going to be very good defensively. But can they score more points than they give up? The answer to that question is essentially, in my opinion, yes. The clips we're seeing out of camp, okay? I know these clips are, highly, I will say, doctored. I don't mean that in a like they're fake way. I mean it more in like they're edited. They've got music behind them. They've got effects on them. They've got slow-mo. They've got every sort of like possible thing you could put on it to make it look more grand. And that's what spring ball is really all about, but it's hard to really judge what's going on in those clips. So based on the clips that I've seen, take it with a grain of salt. This Iowa State offense might have something to it. I think Jalen Raynor, we saw him, now in the running for one of these top leader of the entire country football player awards. Okay. He's going to be a great leader for this Iowa State squad. And it's not really a question of, who's going to be the guy for Iowa State on offense anymore, as far as leadership goes, right? That's a lock at this point. But when it comes to his quarterback play, and I'll say the leadership, I think makes a big difference. But when it comes to his quarterback play, the clips I'm seeing, he might be legit, might be able to put it right on the money. Now, keep in mind, still just fall camp here, right? Just some videos, okay? We're getting closer and closer to the season. So these videos are going to start to showcase closer and closer to game action, less like just on air, 7-on-7, tag up style defense, whatever. It'll start to get a little bit more and more intense. Obviously, not too intense where you're going to get hurt in practice, but you're going to start to turn up the intensity a little bit as we get closer to game time. But for now, like these throws look good. These runs look good. This offensive line looks like they're moving people around. This is the age-old question, okay? I remember I went to a spring showcase before Iowa State had theirs. We went to the Nebraska spring showcase, spring practice a few years ago, and I went with a Nebraska fan, and the question was, is our offense good or is our defense terrible? And then it was the exact opposite when the defense would make plays. Is our defense good or is our offense terrible? It's hard to gauge where your team is at because they're playing themselves, right? Especially when you're only getting little clips here and there. Did he just get beat on that play? Was he put in the wrong position? Did he make a wrong read? Did that player, that offensive wide receiver, actually just make an unbelievable play? Right? It's hard to really know for sure. But right now, I am seeing enough clips that I'm like, maybe they can. I think fundamentally, when you talk about the style of offense that Iowa State is going to run, predominantly going to be run heavy, predominantly going to run the clock out, predominantly going to make you pay, right? I believe it was Tyler Roll that said something. Gosh, I can't remember for sure. I'm pretty sure I'm right. He said it wasn't time of possession, it's time of physicality. Like Iowa State is going to be the tougher team, or at least they're going to try to be for the entirety of the game. Obviously on both sides of the ball, but when they have the ball, they're going to make you pay for it. It's not going to be a 70-yard strike, drive in and drive out. That's my only concern when it comes to, can this team score enough points? I wonder if the style of play will limit them, and where they're trying to reduce the amount of possessions in a game. If you reduce the amount of possessions, you effectively increase the amount of value of each possession, right? If it's a game where each team has 3 possessions, you have a 1 in 3 chance to change the game each time, versus each team has 25 possessions. You fail on 1 possession, it's not the end of the world because you got 24 others. So for Iowa State to limit the number of possessions, it effectively increases their win chance in a lot of these games, but it does limit the amount of points they can score. So I think they're capable of scoring that many points, but it will be the style of Iowa State play that really determines whether or not they're going to reach a 35-point per game margin, right? Winning by 30.5 points or 35 points or 40 points is a lot tougher because you have to score that many more points than your opponent, right? It's not, does Iowa State win it 31-28? It's can Iowa State win it by 31 points over Southeast Missouri State? To do that, I do think they're going to have to hold their opponent to like practically nothing. Is the defense that good? Well, I feel like you might know what my answer is, but let me break it down for you coming up right here after this. But first, a word from our friends over at FanDuel. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick for who you think will hit a home run in their game. If you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with every day's games, whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league. Every game has someone capable of going deep. Now you get the chance to make your prediction before first pitch. With only 20-something days to go, I believe it's 25 days to go before college football is back, before Iowa State football is back, I am relying heavily on the MLB. Obviously, the Red Sox going on a crazy run has been so much fun to watch. But day in and day out, they're at least being a live sport on the TV, watching homers. Is there anything better? I mean, we are getting very, very dangerously close to college football season. But for now, it's all about the MLB. So are you ready to play your game today? Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, an official partner of the MLB. So Iowa State is a 30.5 point favorite against Southeast Missouri State and a 12.5 point dog against Iowa, the Hawkeyes. We've talked a little bit about where is Iowa State on that spectrum, on that graph, spread, it's almost like a fitting word, between those two spreads. I think they're closer to a 30.5 point favorite. Why? We just broke down the second segment. I think they can score a lot of points. They have the offensive firepower, the ability. It's really going to come down to style of play. And the reason I say that is this team is built, in my opinion, from coaching, from roster, from offensive identity, from honestly, even defensive identity, to get possession of the ball and then hang on to it. Time of physicality, as Tyler Roll says. Now, why do I bring that up for our defensive segment? Because Jesse Bobbitt just said the other day that Iowa State is going to focus on getting the ball back to their offense. Why is that? Why would he say that? Well, when you have the ball, you are in control, right? You decide. That's why when we have the conversation, this quick tangent, when we have the conversation of what's the hardest position in football, quarterback comes up because there's so much you got to know, right? You got to know all these different plays and not only what you're doing, but the offensive line, the running back, what's their intended direction of travel. If you're passing it, what are all the receivers doing? What is the defensive look? Do you need to make an audible at the line? Do you need to shift protection? Do you need to make a change to this, that, the other? It's not a simple, where am I going to throw the ball? Or am I handing it off, right? Quarterback, very in-depth. But cornerback also always comes up, because you're dealing with receivers who know exactly where they're going, and they're going there at about 100 miles an hour. You need to react to that receiver and get in position to make a play, right? Even if you react, if you're out of position, tough luck, right? The ball's probably going to get there, and it can be a really tight window. These offenses get really good at timing. They know if you're facing out, if you're going to be an outside bail, which would be ridiculous, you'd go back to the quarterback like that, but you're going to go outside bail and they attack that inside hip on a post. It doesn't, you don't get 25 yards to catch back up to make that reaction. As soon as that wide receiver plants and you have to either speed turn or completely change your hip direction, and now you've lost all momentum, ball's already there. He's streaking down the field. You might have some safety help, but at this point, the pass has been completed and you're hoping for a fumble, right? That's why the defense is so difficult, because you never know what's going on. So Iowa State's saying, the end of the tangent, Iowa State is saying, we want to get the ball back to the offense so they can make decisions. They can control the pace of the game. They can slow this game down. They can, essentially, when you have the ball, another side point here, when you have the ball, your opponent does not. So for them to score, essentially, you would have to mess up so bad that they would end up with the ball in the end zone. Or if they end up with the ball in field goal range, they could kick a field goal. I don't need to explain a ton of football theory here. My point is, I'm bringing all this up because Jesse Bobbitt made it very clear that Iowa State is going to prioritize getting the ball into the offense's hands and trying to limit possessions as a whole. That translates to the defense. Bet you didn't expect that segue. We've been talking about the offense, all that offensive talk to set up this defense. If Iowa State's plan plays out the way I think that they're trying to set it up, this defense will get the ball back immediately, and the offense is just going to hang on to it. I know that sounds like, oh, that sounds pretty standard. Like, why wouldn't everybody do that? Well, not everybody's trying to do that. Not every offense is built for that style. So Iowa State, get the ball to the offense, hang on to it for as long as you can, get it back to the other team, hopefully on a kickoff after a touchdown, and then the defense, quick stop, get it back to the offense. Offense can dictate the style of play. Offense can dictate the time between plays. The offense can decide, is it run, is it pass? Defense doesn't get to decide that. When they're limiting possessions in a game by playing this style of offense and defensive combo, you're only giving your opponent so many opportunities. The reason I wanted to talk about this today was we have talked kind of a lot about what's the defensive style, a 4-2, a 4, what is that? 3-3-5, like 4-1, no, 4-2-6, 4-2-5. My math is like not mathing right now. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have even said that. But my point is, we've talked about the players. We've talked about the formations. We've talked about the plays. Players, formations, plays. We haven't really talked about philosophy. I think Iowa State's philosophy for attacking these games will generally be one that lends themselves to limiting points in general. Now, of course, that doesn't guarantee anything. You might give the opponent 5 possessions in an entire game. That's just over 1 per quarter, and they could finish the game with 35 points. They could score a touchdown on every single drive. So I'm not saying that, if you have time of possession like crazy, you're going to win a bunch of games. If you limit your opponent to only 5 possessions, well, they guarantee to be under 10 points. That's not what I'm saying at all. 5 possessions is 5 opportunities to score up to 8 points, right? So what would that be? 40. They could score up to 40 points with those 5 possessions. But at the same time, if they only have 5 possessions, they can't score more than 40. So Iowa State's offense only needs to score 41. I know it's not the best argument, but I think that it's being tested at that limit. Ultimately, most times, Iowa State's not going to give up a touchdown on a 2-point conversion every time their defense is on the field. Defense is probably going to make a few stops, and Iowa State has to just capitalize on the few times that they do have the ball. By playing less possession games, Iowa State will be more likely to limit, their opponents to 10, 14 points a game, 18 points a game. Those are the kind of 3 numbers that are being thrown around, I feel like, to be one of those top defenses in the country and to cover spreads like that 30.5. Okay. Every time you score, you give your ball back, the ball back to the opponent. So I'm not saying that, there is an element to that, but at the same time, I think Iowa State can put themselves in enough positions where they're putting stress on every single possession their opponent has, that they can win games like this. Maybe they won't cover every spread by 30.5, but I think they'll be able to cover those 12.5 point spreads, no problem. Is kind of what I'm trying to say here. Roundabout way of saying I think this team's going to be really good. And 30.5 points, yeah, it's a big stretch, I would say. It's definitely a big spread, but it's not undoable. This team is very capable, in my opinion. I think they have the offensive firepower. I think they have the ability defensively, and I think they have the scheme to win games. We'll see if that scheme lends themselves to a 30.5 point victory. Maybe the defense comes out with a few, pick sixes, fumble sixes. Boom. That completely turns the game on its head. And I think Iowa State, honestly, you want to throw a prediction in here because you stuck around to the very end. I appreciate you for doing that. I think Iowa State covers both these spreads. For now, this point in the season, this point in the year, I think Iowa State wins both of these games, which would mean that doesn't mean they cover both these spreads. I think they cover both these spreads. That's all I have to say today. Make sure you hit subscribe down below. It's completely free. Helps us prove that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. That being said, until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.